The rain came down in heavy sheets, the kind that blurred the world into streaks of gray and silver, when Daniel Carter first noticed the old man. He was hunched against the storm, coat too thin for the cold, shoes soaked through, struggling to cross the street as traffic rushed past without mercy. Daniel was already late, his phone buzzing with reminders he didn't want to see, his mind heavy with bills, school fees, and the quiet fear that came with raising a child alone. He could have kept walking. Most people did, but something in the old man's slow, determined steps made Daniel stop. Daniel handed his umbrella to his daughter, Grace, and stepped into the rain. He took the old man's arm gently, feeling how light it was, how fragile. "Let me help you, sir," he said, raising his voice over the storm. The man looked up, eyes sharp despite his age, surprised by the kindness. Together they crossed the street, water splashing around their ankles. Daniel walked him to a nearby bus stop, shielding him from the wind, listening as the old man introduced himself as Mr. Thomas Reed. They spoke only a little, about the weather, about how the rain never asks permission before it falls. When the bus arrived, Mr. Reed gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength and said, "Kindness always finds its way back." Daniel smiled politely, not thinking much of it, then hurried away with Grace, soaked and late and still worried. That night Daniel's worries returned louder than the storm. Since his wife Mary had passed away 3 years earlier, life had been a careful balancing act. He worked as a facilities supervisor at a large corporate building, a job he couldn't afford to lose. Lately, complaints had been piling up, equipment failures he hadn't been given the budget to fix, staff shortages he couldn't control. His manager, cold and impatient, had warned him that one more issue could cost him everything. As Daniel tucked Grace into bed, she asked why he looked sad. He kissed her forehead and told her the truth in the gentlest way he could. "Sometimes doing the right thing feels heavy," he said, "but it still matters." Grace smiled sleepily, trusting him in a way that broke his heart and healed it at the same time. The next morning began badly. Daniel arrived at work to find an email waiting for him, an urgent review scheduled with senior leadership. His hands trembled as he read it. This was it, he thought. The moment everything might fall apart. He walked into the conference room feeling smaller than he ever had, carrying not just his work file but the weight of his daughter's future. Inside sat several executives, their expressions unreadable, and at the head of the table sat a familiar face. Mr. Thomas Reed looked very different out of the rain. He wore a crisp suit, his posture straight, his eyes alert and commanding. For a moment Daniel wondered if stress was playing tricks on him. Then Mr. Reed smiled just slightly and nodded in recognition. The room fell silent as Mr. Reed spoke. He was a major consultant brought in to evaluate operations, and the complaints against Daniel's department were on the agenda. Daniel's chest tightened. He expected the worst. Instead, Mr. Reed asked questions. Calm, fair questions. He listened as Daniel explained the challenges he'd been facing: lack of resources, impossible timelines, problems inherited rather than created. For the first time in months, someone truly listened. When Daniel finished, the room was quiet again. Mr. Reed folded his hands and said, "I met this man yesterday in the rain. He didn't know who I was. He didn't ask for anything. He simply helped." He looked around the table. "That tells me more about his character than any report." Mr. Reed recommended not only that Daniel keep his job, but that his department receive the support it had been denied for too long. He spoke about leadership, about how companies forget that the people holding them together are often the ones struggling quietly. By the end of the meeting, the decision was unanimous. Daniel's job was safe. More than that, his work was finally valued. After the meeting, Mr. Reed stopped Daniel in the hallway. "I told you kindness finds its way back," he said softly. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. He thanked him, stumbling over his words. Mr. Reed shook his head. "You already paid," he replied. "You paid in the rain." That evening, Daniel picked Grace up from school with a lighter heart than he'd felt in years. As they walked home, the sky clear and blue, Grace chattered about her day. Daniel listened, smiling, knowing how close he'd come to losing everything, and how a single act of compassion had changed the course of their lives. He understood then that doing the right thing doesn't always bring immediate rewards. Sometimes it just plants a seed. And when that seed finally grows, it reminds us of a simple, powerful truth. Even in the hardest storms, kindness is never